we're doing this week is it's part 2 of a sermon series called The Questions That Change Us. And we're looking at these 3 really significant questions that Jesus asked in the Bible. And the first question that we looked at last week was, what do you want? So that's the question. Jesus asked a guy, he says, what do you want? And we see that the disciples he asked, they didn't quite know what they wanted. So last week was all about finding what you want. It was all about figuring out, what is your deep desire and your deep heart right here. Leaf, if you could put this slide up here. There we go. Thank you so much. Questions that change us. The other thing is with that is that, well, let me just say, if you want to know more about last week's message, then please go to our YouTube page and you can see the sermon that's there. But this week we look at a second question. We look at another question. And here's the thing about Jesus and questions. Did you know that Jesus asked 307 questions throughout his ministry? 307 questions. That's our 4-year-old Wyatt at 10 a.m. So, that's what we deal with. Wyatt's in the 700-800s by, lunchtime. So Jesus asked 300 questions. And then it's like as if Jesus knew something significant about questions that maybe we don't. The thing that we talked about this last week that Jesus knows about questions is that opinion or arguments can shape opinions. I can argue you into an opinion. I can argue for something. I can lay out an amazing argument, to support something, but all I'm going to do really is influence your opinions. Arguments influence opinions, but questions influence people. Questions change people. And if you think about it, you can look at the red letter text in your Bible, if you have one of those, or if you're on an app, you can, switch the toggle for red letter on. And what that means is that all the words of Jesus are in red. And if you look through there, you will see time and time again that Jesus is responding to people with questions. What happens? One of my favorite stories, the woman that's caught in the act of adultery and she's about to be stoned. Well, did Jesus try and change their opinions? Did he lay out an argument for her? No. He asked a question. He said, let the one, who of you is without sin? Well, then you could throw the first stone. Constantly as the Pharisees were trying to attack Jesus, to trip him up, to prove to him and to others that Jesus was breaking the law. Every time they tried to do that, Jesus, he never argued with them, but he always met them with a question. So Jesus has got this question thing figured out. And he's figured out how he can impact somebody's heart and possibly change the trajectory of their life through using questions. So what we're going to look at today, the question we look at today is Jesus asked a sick man. He goes to a sick man, a very sick man, sick for 38 years. And he asks this guy, he says, do you want to be healed? And that's the question for you today. It's the question for us today. Do you want to be healed? This is a sick person that he's asking, and I'm asking us, and I'll qualify this here in just a minute, but the question for us today here in this room as we sit here is, do you want to be healed? So who is this for? Let me qualify who's this for here. This is for anybody that's experienced any kind of hurt or any kind of pain. Maybe it's a physical pain. Maybe it's a pulled muscle, a pinched nerve. Maybe it's cramps. Maybe you ate too many donuts this morning and your blood sugar's feeling the pain. Maybe it's a physical pain. But also this is for those of us that have dealt with any kind of emotional pain, any kind of spiritual pain. Ever been hurt by a church? Ever been hurt by a pastor? It's these kinds of pains, relational pain, marital pain. The pain that we carry around where we've been hurt and we're having a hard time forgiving, or we can't get so that we are forgiven. This message today is for anybody that's dealing with any kind of pain. Remember the situation you went through or the pain that happened to you 10, 15 years ago that you still haven't dealt with, and that's still there. That's the pain that this is talking about today. So I go back to that question of, do you want to be healed? It's like, if I want to get, one of my children's attention, I'll throw a hey on the front of it, be like, Wyatt, can you, Wyatt? Hey, Wyatt. And I feel like that with this, like, hey, do you want to get healed? Like, guys, do we? It's like, or do we just want to sit there with our pain and with the things that we're going through? So, Jesus asked this guy, and we'll get into his story here in just a minute here, but Jesus asked this guy, a sick guy, he says, do you want to be healed? Seems like a very obvious question, right? I think a sick person would be like, yeah, And obvious questions are great. Let me tell you a quick story. I had a friend growing up. This guy's also, his name was Chris, and my name's Chris. So when we hung out together, it was kind of funny. But him and his dad had this weird relationship with each other. And when I did a lot of like duck hunting and hunting with Chris, he had a boat, he had duck dogs, he had all this stuff. But so we hunted a lot, and every time that we were gone hunting, about like 2 hours into something, or fishing even, Chris would get a call from his dad. And his dad would call, and Chris would answer the phone, and his dad would say, hey, you got your phone? He answered the phone, and he asked him, hey, you still got your phone? And then when he got home, at the end, when we would get home and walk in, his dad would come downstairs in the basement, would be unloading, dead ducks and pulling feathers off and all that cool stuff. And his dad would say, hey, you home? And Chris would be like, no, it's a ghost. I'm not home. But, I thought it was kind of funny. It's definitely a southern thing in the United States. But, it was an obvious question like this, do you want to be healed, to a sick person kind of question. And obvious questions really bothered Chris, and him and his dad's relationship was kind of funny. But it seems like Jesus is asking a very obvious question. But there's more to it. If we ask ourselves, okay, Jesus isn't dumb, so why is he asking a sick man if he wants to be healed? Well, again, Jesus has got something figured out about our hearts, because you know what? He made us. He made you. He created us. So he knows how we work. And so what Jesus is doing when he asks this man is he's gauging the man's desire to change. That's what he wants to know. And I go back, I'm going to go back to this a lot. I go back to the question of, do you want to be healed? It's like the first question that you've got to ask yourself is, well, do you have a desire to change and to be healed? That's why Jesus asked him, because here's the truth about us, and we're going to be able to identify with this, and it's not enough to need healing. It's not enough to need it. You have to want to be healed. You've got to want it. All of us have something that we need healing for. All of us do. And we all go in and out of these seasons where we need it more or we need it less. But we all have things that we need healing from. Hey, you've got your pain. You've got your hurt. You've got your unforgiveness. You've got whatever experience that you had a long time ago. It's been buried. Let me tell you, I'm the best at burying pain and experiences. I just can shove it right down. Just put it right down. I can shove it so far down that it lives in my shoes. I just shove it all the way down there. And I want you to like, I'm really good at that. We watched a movie one time. My wife rented a movie, the Dragon movie. Yeah, she's like, oh, God, I don't remember the name of it, but it was about a dragon and a boy in a relationship. But whatever it was, it connected with every emotional hurt that I had buried my entire life, okay? It was a cartoon. And we rented it as a family movie, and it connected me to every past hurt I've ever had in my life, relationally. And I was like, nope, I'm out. I'm done. Like halfway through the movie, I was mad at her for getting it. I was mad at us for watching it. I was feeling feelings and emotions, and all that was very undealt with stuff because I've needed to be healed, but I had not wanted healing. That's the problem. So when Jesus is sitting here with you right now, he's asking you the question like, hey, do you want to be healed? And it's not just do you want it, but are you willing to do what it takes to receive the healing that you have today? Are you willing to do it? Because I can tell you, for so many years and for so long, I was more than happy to just leave things buried, and just leave things down and not deal with it, because I wasn't willing to do what it takes to receive it. And it's because I had these like blockers in my life. And I've got a few blockers that we're going to talk about. These are things that prevent you from being willing to want to be healed. It's things that kind of get in the way. And one of those, the first one is definitely is fear. The first blocker to our healing is fear. We are terrified of the unknown. We're terrified of it. We don't want to step out into the unknown. I mean, we are afraid of what could be asked of us. Part of the reason why we don't step into some kind of healing is because we don't know what it's going to cost us. What if, for me to heal, I have to forgive somebody and I don't want to forgive that person? Like, what's that going to, oh, that's going to cost me a lot. Now, I'm afraid of that. I don't know what would happen with that. So I'm going to let that be a blocker. I'm going to keep myself out of that. I'm not going to let myself walk into healing. We are just afraid of what it might cost. We are afraid of the unknown, so much so that this keeps us where we are in the middle of our needing to be healed, but not willing to step into the wanting. In fact, we would rather stick with the pain that we know than face the change that we don't. Better the devil we know than the miracle we don't is like another way to put it. Because we are so afraid of change and we're so afraid of the unknown that we would rather stick with this pain that we know than the change that we don't. So again, I ask you, hey, do you need healing? You know why I keep asking this over and over and over and over again? Because we bury this stuff and we hide this stuff and we keep it reserved and we make a decision. Pastor gets up talking about healing and emotional healing and all kinds of stuff. And you've already made the decision, I am not dealing with that today. I'm not dealing with it. I'm not going into it. We've got a good Sunday lunch. Who's going to Ashley's for the Carvery after this? Nobody? Okay, good. Don't get in my way, I wish I could be there for that. Oh, man. So anyway, but we've already made up our mind. And again, I'm going to meet you with, hey, do you want to be healed? Do you want that? And if you do want that, then you've got to face your fears. It's crazy to think that your fear is something that's standing in the way of you having freedom and peace. Another blocker that we have is pride. We are prideful people. We are. And some pride is like, again, let me talk about Wyatt for a second. Wyatt walks around and he says, I'm the bestest. I'm the goodest. I'm gooder. Dad, I'm gooder than you. Dad, look, he'll pick up a brick in the yard and he'll be like, look, Dad, I'm stronger than you, Meanwhile, I can throw him 10 meters in the air, but he's like, no, I'm good. I'm the fastest. And so we were instilling self-confidence in Wyatt, and that has now tipped over the edge. And now we are trying to humble him, a little bit, teach him some of those lessons. That's not necessarily the pride I'm talking about. The pride I'm talking about is this pride of I don't want you to know that I'm not okay. I can't let you see that I don't have it all together, because then you'll think that there's something wrong with me. There is something wrong with you. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with us. Yeah, we're all broken. There's something wrong with every single one of us. If we could just drop the pride. You know what pride does? Is it prevents you from being honest with yourself. And it prevents you from being honest with others. And we don't want people to see, because it's like, no, I need people to know that I have it together. I just accepted years and years and years ago, as I led this church and other churches, that I was just going to not cover up any of my flaws. And I was just going to not let pride get in the way. And I was just going to lead forward in my failures. And I've seen that has helped so many people, including myself. But it's helped so many people. Pride gets in the way of our healing. Another blocker that we have is denial. Denial. It's not talking about the Nile River. Denial River. No. Okay, that's just me. Blockers to healing, denial. What this denial is this is where you've gotten to a place of, I would rather just deny that it exists than to deal with it. I would rather just pretend that it's not there. If I just don't worry about this pain, or if I just don't deal with it, if I don't acknowledge it, eventually it'll go away, right? No. Eventually, my marriage will be fixed and my marriage will be fine, because I'll just deny. I'm just going to deny that there's anything wrong. I'm going to deny that it needs addressed, and just living in denial. I don't need to fix anything because it'll just sort itself out. Time is the healer of all wounds. Well, time does heal, but it may not heal in the right way. What happens if you break a bone? I punched a wall one time when I was in college. It was over a girl. She cheated on me, and I was like, I'm full of angst and anger. And I hit this wall and I broke all the bones in my hand. And then I thought, well, that's cool, It wasn't cool. I'm not even an angry person. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do something different. I'm just going to blink, It probably wasn't cool looking, So anyway, I broke the bones in my hand. And if I didn't go to the hospital, if I was in denial that my hand was broken, and I didn't go to the hospital and get that sorted, then time would heal that wound, but it would heal as a broken hand. And then later in life, that hand would give me more and more and more problems. So I got up. This was like 2 a.m. I went into the house. I woke my parents up, like, hey, I think I broke my hand. They said, did you hit the wall? I said, yeah. And then they said, okay, you can take yourself to the emergency room. So I drove myself and paid for myself to go to the emergency room, where they could give me this story doesn't actually matter, so I'm going to move on in the sermon, but I dealt with it. The point that I'm trying to make is denial is you think that it'll get better over time, but it doesn't. It just heals in a way that is permanently broken. And then what happens when you want to fix it down the road? You got to re-break it. So what you're putting off today is just compounding and getting worse and worse later down the road. Another blocker that we have is shame. Shame is like, I am embarrassed for you to know that there's something wrong with me. I'm embarrassed. You know what's crazy is if you had your hurt and your pain here today, and Jesus and I had a meeting last night. We were praying and we had a meeting, and Jesus said, okay, Chris, here's what you're going to do. You're going to ask people that if they will come down front at the end of the service and confess their pain and ask for healing, then, this is Jesus talking, then I will heal them instantly of it. I'll just poof, take it away. And now, Chris, all you have to do is tell them about it. And so then if I told you, hey, all you have to do is come down, and me and Jesus are going to 100% heal your pain. I heard from God, it's 100%. And then what happens? Get to the end of the message and we say, if you need healing for anything, please come down front. And you know what happens? Everyone goes to coffee. Nobody comes down front. What a wasted opportunity. One of the reasons we do that is because shame. I'm afraid that if someone sees me walk down front, they will see that I'm not okay. And I'm kind of embarrassed about that. And we also feel a shame in that we don't want people, we don't know how things got so bad. I think of the show Hoarders. Anyone seen Hoarders? And on that show, so many people they're hoarding, they're storing stuff in their house. And it gets to a place where now they're embarrassed for people to come to their house because they are embarrassed that they let it get so bad. That's the other kind of shame that we have here. Our last blocker is resignation. This is where I've just resigned to this is my new life. I just have pain. How many people have had an injury that happened a long time ago and you've just never dealt with it, and you're just like, well, this is just my new normal. I just live with this now. This is it. And we do this with our emotions, with our relationships as well. Well, that relationship's broken. I could fix it, or I could just, that's what it is. That's what it is now. And we become resigned to our reality when our reality could change. But this is like a coping mechanism. And even more importantly, what's really scary about this one is if you have resigned to your situation, then you've given up on hope. That's what happens when we resign. We say there's no hope for change. No hope for me or no hope in me. I've given up on this hope. And what I hope that you can see in the rest of this message here is that this promise that I have for you, in that there is always hope for you. You can't outrun hope. You can't get to the end of hope. You can't find a place in your life where there is no return to hope. But sometimes you need to be reminded of it. Sometimes you need to be reminded that it's available to you. It's accessible to you. Because we spent so much time hurting and so much time in pain. I remember the first time, so my journey with anxiety and depression that I've kind of had my entire life. I remember that there was a season where my psychiatrist had given me something for panic attacks. And I remember sitting on the couch with Casey and looking at this pill, and it wasn't anything crazy. So it's not like it wasn't crack cocaine or meth or anything like that. But it was just like a daily tablet that would help with panic attacks. I was like, what's it going to do? What's it going to be like? A little bit nervous. Took it, expected it to make me like, it'd be like doing meth, or I'd be like, well, I'm out of my mind, man, but that's not what it did, okay? But when I took that tablet, many of you are probably on as well. When I took that tablet, it's like the panic attack went away. It just went away. And I just had this smile come over my face, and I was like, is this what it's like to live without a constant panic attack? That is crazy how nice this is. To just not have impending doom looming over my head and my thoughts 24/7. I mean, it was incredible. I had sort of given up on hope. I had sort of resigned to the fact that, this is just my new normal. I live with anxiety. I live with depression. I live in a constant state of panic or fight or flight. And to be reminded of oh man, once you deal with that, how good it feels. I mean, it still brings a smile to my face. That was such a significant moment in my life because it told me that there is still hope. There's hope to live without that. So before we jump into the story where Jesus is actually interacting with this guy, let me just hit you again with hey, do you need healing? Yes. Hey, do you want to be healed? That's your choice. That's the decision that you have to make. So it's do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed from the hurts that you've experienced in your life? Because it's available. So let's jump into the story here. So we're in John here, in John chapter 5. And Jesus is hanging out with his disciples. And so there's this Jewish feast that's going on, all right? They're in Jerusalem. It's a Jewish feast. It's a festival. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem. The significance to that is that it doesn't tell us what festival it was. And if you try and find in the Bible, there's educated guesses on it. It could be Passover. It could be the Feast of Booths or the Feast of the Tabernacle, lots of different options for it there. But at the end of the day, they don't actually know what feast this is right here. But the point is that everybody's in Jerusalem. They've all come to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is packed. It's proper packed. And everybody's there and everybody's gathering. And so Jesus and his disciples show up for this festival that's going on. And so now in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, so this is a specific place in the wall where people entered into the city, there is a pool which is called, in Hebrew, Jewish Aramaic, Bethesda. And this pool has these 5 porticos. Now I want to show you a picture of this here. There we go. Okay. So if you look over here on the side, you'll see the sheep gate. You'll see the gate here. And outside this sheep gate, there would be pens and areas where the sheep could be gathered there. Why did they do that? Well, because it was significant. Because they would bring the sheep and the lamb in for sacrifice. And they would bring them through a gate and bring them in. And those would be then prepared to be sacrificed. They would be washed, they would be clean, and they would be sacrificed to God. So this sheep gate is a very religiously significant place in the city. This is like where the sacrifice is coming in. And so there would be a lot of people around this area. There would be a ton of people and animals. There would be prophets and priests, and there would be disciples. There would be the Pharisees would be over there. This would be like a really busy place. And just inside of the sheep gate here, you've got the pools of Bethesda right here. And these pools were huge here. So the scripture tells us that there's 5 like porticos to it, basically covered porches. So I kind of want you to get the image of this. So there's 1 covered porch, 2 covered porch, 3, 4, and 5. So that's where they got the 5 covered porches. And inside here, it's Jesus and them. They come into the city. They go over by the sheep gate. And then they come to this place right here. Another fun fact for you, if you're a bit of a Bible nerd, is Nehemiah built this after Jerusalem had been destroyed, and Nehemiah comes in and he comes to restore the city walls. Nehemiah built this about 400 years before Jesus came. So you can put that in your pocket and pull that out next time. So here's your covered area. So Jesus comes to this place here, and it's packed and it's full and it's significant and it's ritually significant. And then we see that in verse 3 here, we can look, we say in these porticos, so in these covered areas, in the covered areas lay a great number of people who were sick, blind, lame, and withered. So they were like infirmed. So all over these 5 porches are people laying there, sick, blind, lame, and withered. And that's where Jesus decided, following Jesus, sidebar here, following Jesus will always take you to the sick and the needy. If you're really following Jesus, Jesus is going to bring you out of your comfort zone, and he's going to take you and put you in line with people that need him, other people that need healing, other people that are broken of some kind. And that's kind of the thing that just comes from following Jesus. So if you're considering following Jesus, I do want you to know that Jesus cared very, 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 very deeply for the people that were sick and infirmed and not well. Now, these guys are sitting here waiting for a stirring to happen in the water. And in verse 4, it's going to tell us exactly what this is here. Okay, so verse 4. So, it's okay. Everyone go, oh, wow. In verse 4, in a lot of your Bibles, there is no verse 4. It goes from 3 to 5. Q, are we okay? Do I need to switch mics? Okay. Technical difficulties. He's already got that one off. Hello. Okay. It's buttery smooth. Okay. So in verse 4, it doesn't exist in a lot of your Bibles. So it's like, well, where is it? Where did it go? So verse 4 was added in later. So this is where you need to understand your Bible a little bit. It was added in later. So in verse 3, they mention stirring waters. And then we'll read in verse 7 that they mention an angel of the Lord coming and bubbling the water up and, stirring the waters. And that there's a potential for a miracle. But what happens is over time, as the scribes are writing the text, people forget why they were waiting on the water to stir. And so later, somebody would have written in what is now verse 4. So your Bibles will either omit it completely, or it'll have a little footnote, and it'll say this is not part of the original scriptures. This is to remind people that are passing down the story of why they were waiting at the pool for the water to stir. So if we read what verse 4 does say, it says, "For an angel of the Lord went down into the pool at appointed seasons and stirred up the water." This is what they're waiting on. So what's happening here is all the sick people are gathered around the edge of the pool on those 5 covered porches. And then at some point, the water is going to bubble up and stir. And an angel of the Lord is stirring the water. Well, it wasn't actually God that was doing this. This is superstition. I mean, for all we know, a bunch of bullfrogs, fart at the same time underwater, and bubbles come up, and somebody falls into the water, and they come out of the water, and their back hurts a little less than it did before. And then now they're like, I got healed. And then people start saying, when the water bubbles, the first person in wins. They win the prize of healing. And it creates the superstition. And then word gets out. And then before you know it, there's 700 people crammed into 5 porches that are waiting for water to bubble because they think that if they get in it first, then they find healing. Wild. It's wild what we do for healing. It's wild how desperate we can be for healing. We can tell God no and say, "No, thank you, God. I'm afraid of that. I don't want to do that. I'm shameful of that. I feel guilty. I'm resigned to it. I've denied it." We can say all that to God and be like, no. Turn this, no. What if the best way to lose weight, speaking for myself, so I'm not calling anyone in this room fat, what if the best way for me to have lost weight in the past was I had to deal with my emotional pain first? That's actually the best diet for me, was dealing with myself. But it's a whole lot easier to take fat burner pills, or it's easier to start a new workout or a new eating plan, or, I'm keto now. And then 2 weeks later, you're like, well, now I'm just all dark chocolate. And then a week after that, now I'm on milk chocolate completely, and then you're pre-diabetic and, when all you had to do is just deal with yourself. That's the thing. And these people that are gathered around here, they have physical ailments, but they are at a significantly, ritualistically holy part of the city, at the sheep gate, where the offerings to God come in. And there they are chasing superstition. Isn't that wild? So okay. So if we read on here in verse 5, there was a certain man there who had been ill for 38 years. Think about it. Okay, Lefa, put that picture of the porches back up for me right here. Okay, it's hard to see how big this is. But these pools were 20 feet deep. I don't know what that is in meters, but my Bible said 20 feet. I forgot to translate it. 20 feet deep, and they were huge. And this was like water storage for all of Jerusalem. It's a large area, guys. It's a huge area. And there are people all around all 5 of these right here. But when Jesus enters, look what Jesus says. Okay, Lefa, go back to verse 5. There was a certain man. That means that Jesus sees the one. You are the one. That means that when Jesus it comes here to church on Sunday. You know why church is so good for you? Because we curate a place for you to connect with Jesus. That's the only reason we do this, is for you to have an opportunity to connect with Jesus. Why? Because it's hard to do during the week. And it's hard to put ourselves in that zone during the week. So we curate the opportunity for it. And if you come here on a Sunday morning and you're a part of the group of Church Home, I want you to know that Jesus says He sees that there is a certain you. There is a certain He. There is a certain person. Jesus cares for the one in the midst of the crowd. He cares for it. So He says there was a certain man there who had been ill for 38 years. For 38 years he'd been ill. He wasn't just 38 years old. He would have been much, much older. But he had been known to be ill for 38 years. For 38 years, this guy laid on a mat or a pallet next to the pool, hoping that he would get in first when the water farted. That's what he was doing for 38 years. And now Jesus here in verse 6, when Jesus noticed him lying there, helpless. Jesus notices the helpless. See, you know how I said earlier, I just decided that I was going to lead with my failures. I was going to throw my failures out there. Instead of being in denial or prideful or shameful or any of that stuff, I just made the decision that I want to look the most broken and helpless that I can so that I hopefully stand out to Jesus, that he sees me in the crowd and he helps me. I'd rather just be honest with it because I know that Jesus has a reputation for noticing the helpless, the broken, the hurt, those that are in pain. So Jesus noticed him lying there helpless, knowing that he had been in that condition a long time. He said to this guy, do you want to get well? Do you want to be healed? That's the question that he asked. Obvious question, right? We talked about this at the beginning. But Jesus was trying to gauge whether or not this guy wanted to be healed. So, do you want to be healed? He asked the man. And the man's response is pretty good because Jesus is trying to gauge his willingness to be healed. And so in verse 7, the invalid, an invalid is not it means, anybody that's got like an ailment or physical issue. The invalid answered, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool. Who else feels alone? Hey, I'm all alone in this, God. God, I'm alone. I don't have anybody to help. I don't have anybody talking to me. I just sit lonely in my room or in my house and I just hurt. Or I drive around or I'm here, or I'm putting a mask on, putting a front up that I'm okay, but deep down inside I know I'm not okay. But I feel like there is nobody to help me get in the pool to receive healing or help." But Jesus noticed him and Jesus saw him. And we as a church notice each other and we see each other. So you don't have to be alone here. But it does mean that you've got to figure out what those blockers are in your life and quiet those blockers. You got to get over the fear, the pride, the shame, the resignation, the denial. You got to get over that stuff to receive the help. So anyway, he tells Jesus, no one's there to help me get into the pool. When the water is stirred up and while I'm coming, so he's coming to get into it myself, someone else steps down ahead of me. So the man tells Jesus, I am willing and I do want healing. I'm just not able. But God, I want it. And God, I'm willing. And I'm trying to do it. I'm paying whatever price I need to pay to try to get into the water first. But I just don't have anybody to help me. I mean, that's the definition of helpless. Someone that wants healing, but doesn't have anybody to help them get there. Someone that wants to be better, but they have no way, no mechanism, or no means to be better. That's the definition of helpless. And that's the man that Jesus came to. That's the man that Jesus identified out of the hundreds of other sick people sitting around in those covered porches. He identified a certain man, the one who was helpless and broken and had no means for healing on his own. No means. That's who Jesus identified and came to there. So in verse 8 here, after Jesus talks to him, Jesus says to him, after the man responds and says, yes, I would like to be healed, but I'm just unable to. Jesus responds to him. He says, get up and pick up your pallet and walk. Think about this. Let's not glaze over this, okay? The man's been laying still for 38 years. You ever sat on your foot wrong and it falls asleep? Okay, yeah? You ever try and just get up, Just get up and then you fall down because that foot's numb, that foot's falling asleep? You ever try that? This man has been laying still for 38 years, muscles atrophied, nerve endings no longer working, parts of his body that hadn't moved for years and years and years. And Jesus tells him, he says, get up. Do you want to be healed? Yes. Okay, get up. He didn't say, okay, do you want to be healed? Yes, okay. Then just like kick him into, 300 style, like just kick him into the water. Jesus didn't make the water fart and bubble and then push the guy in. That's not what Jesus did. Instead, Jesus looks at him, ignores the superstition, and he says, do you want to be healed? Yes. Okay, get up. Jesus shows us that this healing comes from him and not from the water. It doesn't come from anything else other than Jesus. You've been waiting on superstition to kick in, to get into this pool, but you don't need to wait because I can just heal you. So Jesus tells him, get up and pick up your pallet and walk. Now, this is the point where a man who doesn't know that he's been healed has to get up and walk in faith. He doesn't know that he's been healed until he gets up and walks. Because before that, he's just laying there. And so Jesus is asking him, hey, get up and walk. Again, this is the point where he could say, but I don't know how to walk, but I can't walk. Oh, God, but don't you know that I'm too weak? God, don't you know that, my feet are turned the wrong way, that my muscles atrophied? Lord Jesus, I've been sitting on my foot for 38 years. It's a bit asleep right now. He doesn't say any of that stuff. Instead, Jesus says, get up and walk, and the man has to take a step of faith. Guys, you've got to take a step of faith. You got to get up. If you ask for healing, you got to get up and walk. And then immediately in verse 9, the last part of the story, immediately the man was healed and recovered his strength. And he picked up his pallet and he walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. There's a whole story about this that goes on there. Immediately the man was healed. Now there's three groups of people in the room that I want to quickly talk to as we close this message out right here. Because again, hey, do you want to be healed? Do you want healing? Are you ready to do what it takes to receive the healing that's in your life? Are you hurt? Are you sick? Are you? You got to ask yourself that question. Do I actually want this? Do you want to be healed? That's what Jesus is saying. And that's the opportunity for us here. So before I want to talk about three groups of people here. And the first group of people is those of you who need hope. It's those of you who need hope. This is the group of people here that you have forgotten that there is hope for healing in your life. You've forgotten that. You have forgotten that there is, that you can even access hope. If you're one of these people that's in the room that can identify with this, you need hope because you've been laying on the side of the pool waiting for the water to bubble for 38 years and it still hasn't come. And other help hasn't come. And nobody's come to help you out in any possible way. And you need to be reminded that there is hope. Did you know, a couple of facts about hope right here. Did you know that there is nothing that can conquer the available hope of God in your life? It's like we lose track of our hope in God, but God is always still worthy of our hope in Him. We lose track of it, but He's still worthy of it. You can't outrun hope. You can't outrun and get away from it. You can't get yourself to a place where you could say, I no longer have the right to put my hope in Jesus. That doesn't exist. That no longer exists. Because hope is always available to you. And there's a truth I need you to understand here, that God has the power. God has power over what has power over you. God has power over what has power over you. Did something happen in your childhood? Abandonment, abuse, whatever it is. Did something happen in your childhood? Huge disappointment. You were taken advantage of. You were hurt. Did something happen in your childhood that has led you to a place where you are now living this life without any hope? Thinking that I'll always be this way. I'll always be broken. I'll never be loved. I'll never be taken care of. I'll never be fulfilled. I'll never be satisfied. I'll never be able to heal over this thing right here. Well, you need to know that God has power over that. And He's got power to restore your love, to restore love. We want to feel like others loved us and wanted us. We were made by God to crave that relationship. We want to feel like we were chosen, not just by God, but by other people, by our own parents. And sometimes we don't have that luxury. It gets denied because of sin and brokenness that's in the world. But I want you to know that God has power over that. And with God, you can be filled with everything that you just feel like you're craving and you want. He can restore a sense of family. He can restore a purpose in you. He can create, the longing that you have, that forever hunger that just never seems to go away. That longing for something that can't be satisfied or quenched, that kind of pain. Well, Jesus can quench that. And He can fill that part of your heart. You know what can't fill that part of your heart? Anything other than Jesus. But Jesus can and God can. Okay, our second group here is that God has made a way for the healing. This is for those of you that God has made a way for you to have healing. But you just have to step into it. So you've prayed and you've asked God for healing. You've prayed and you've asked God for an emotional heart healing, and God has provided an opportunity for you to have that. Maybe that's a pastor you need to talk to. Maybe that's a counselor that you need to go to. Maybe that's a conversation that your spouse or your mate or your partner has now made themselves available to have for you because God softened their hearts. Now you can go to them and you can apologize and you can get the hurt out and you guys can deal with it together. Well, now it's time for you to step into it. You've asked for healing. Now you need to lean into it and you need to step into what's been made available to you. Don't let a step. It's time for you to get up. This is the place where you've asked for healing. God's made a provision for you to be healed. Now you just have to get up and get off the mat. But it's time for you to do that. Because not all healing comes in the place of, Jesus comes down like a dove and firecrackers and lays, on the top of your head, and everybody in the room starts, doing this. And we've all been to those church services, right? And everybody starts doing that and people are falling out and like, poof, you're healed. Wouldn't that be amazing? Then you wouldn't have to deal with it. And you wouldn't have had to have dealt with anything to become healed. But God cares about your heart so much that yes, He's willing to heal you, but He's also willing to take you on a journey that makes you better in process of your healing. But the only way to access that is to get off the mat and step into it. And the third group of people that I'm talking to this morning is God has brought you through something and now you need to show your mat. So God has healed you, but now you need to show your mat. What the man does in the Bible is after he gets healed on the Sabbath, he goes walking around town and he's got his rolled up mat in his arm. And people see the rolled up mat and they know where he was and what he was doing. And they see him walking around with his rolled up mat. And what ends up happening is his trial becomes his testimony. Now he's walking around and he's got the trial of I spent 38 years stuck on this mat rolled up into my arms. And now that's his testimony that he's out walking. He's healed. Some of you need to take some steps to let your trial become your testimony. It means you need to tell people about it. It means that you need to get baptized. If you have given your life to Jesus, then you are ready to be baptized. If you have said, Jesus, I give you my life. I surrender my life to you. I want you to be my Lord. Then now it's time for you to pick up your mat and get baptized and live and move forward. There's nothing any more complicated to it. Let your trial become your testimony. Let yourself take the thing that you needed healed from, and by carrying that mat and walking around with it, it's telling your kids, your daughters, your sons, it's telling your mates and your family, look at what God has done in my life. That's why baptism is so great. You know what it is? It's you standing there and you saying, I want you to know what God did in me, and I want you to know that I'm living for Him. So I'm publicly saying, hey guys, watch me get baptized. Watch me go under the water. Watch my trial get dunked and come out as a testimony. Maybe you need to step into counseling. Maybe you need to step into, couples therapy. Maybe you need to tell people. Maybe you need to join that small group. And inside that small group, you need to share your story. And instead of, the men's group is way talkative. I've really got to try and, all the men are laughing. I really got to try and get them like, guys, you got to be quiet. You're talking way too much, But let's just say they weren't that way. And let's say they were just dead silent and never talked about anything unless we were eating and talking about sports. But let's just say that they never talked about anything. Maybe it's time that you share your story with your group. Because in sharing it, you let your trial become your testimony. You've got a trial. You've got a testimony. You do. So I end with this question for you. Guys, do you want to be healed? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pray, and we're going to close the service. Service is done. 5 minutes over. Thanks for waiting on me. But it's done. It's over. Queuing in the back. When we close, we're not going to... You can put music on just real softly. Okay? Just put it on real soft. Guys, we're not going to pack up all the chairs quite yet. Let's give it 10 minutes before you start unpacking or packing stuff up. But when the service is done, if you want to be healed, then you come down front. Casey and I will be here, right? Okay, I hadn't pre-qualified this with her. Casey and I will be down here. And here's the thing. We're not going to heal you. I can't heal you. There's no it's not like a defibrillator where I'm going to, okay, 3, 2, 1. Casey's got one hand, I've got the other hand. And we just, and then you walk away healed. We're not going to heal you. God heals you. Maybe it happens now. Maybe it happens later. Maybe it happens at home. I don't know. But you need to have an opportunity to say to somebody, to me and Casey at least, to say to somebody, I want to be healed. And here's what I want to be healed from. And by walking down to the front to do that with us, you're saying, I'm not going to let guilt, shame, pride, denial, resignation, or fear stop me from coming down. I'm not going to let it stop me. And you're going to come down and you're going to look at us and you're just going to say, I want to be healed. And here's what I want to be healed from. And then we can pray for you. But you don't have to be prayed over. If you want to say that and then go get coffee, say, okay, I had to take that step. It's all about taking steps. Maybe your step is just coming down and saying it and then leaving. Maybe your step is coming down and saying it and saying, can you pray for me? And you know what? We're not going to, shamalama ding dong and spin around and put our hands on people and stuff. Like this is intimate between you and God. And we're going to just pray for you and God. All right? It's that simple. But you got to take a step. You got to not be afraid.